everybody, and welcome back to the Pache Bene channel. I am really excited to have today's guest here with us, Kazu Haga. Kazu is the founder of the East Point Peace Academy and a trainer in Kingian Nonviolence. He trains people in nonviolence in prisons, jails, and schools all over the country. Kazu, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Kazu, I always love to hear about how people came to nonviolence. And I would really like to hear about your journey, how you came to nonviolence, and what inspired that. Could you share a little bit?
Yeah, the origin story. There's so many places in my life where I could start the story, but I usually started when I was 17 years old. I was in a time in my life where I was really struggling with a lot of things. There's a lot of just strife and conflict and violence in my home life. And so I turned to drinking and getting high and in and out of trouble. And I actually ended up dropping out of high school when I was 15. And so from the time I was 15 to 17, I was just doing pretty much nothing with my life, a lot of nothing. And when I was 17 years old, I don't know that I would have been able to name it consciously, but I think I was already bored of just that way of life. And I was looking for something in the way that a lot of 17-year-old young people are, right? And luckily, I heard about there was a Japanese Buddhist temple in a town that right next to the town that I lived in. And these were Buddhists who were really committed to nonviolence and social change work. They're called Nipponzan Myohoji. And they do these large or long, like walking pilgrimages. And they were planning a walk from Massachusetts, where I lived at the time, all the way down the coast to New Orleans, and then eventually down the coast of some parts of Africa to retrace the slave route. And their vision was that, it was with the understanding that a lot of the racism that we deal with in our country today is a direct lineage of the legacy of slavery and the genocide of indigenous peoples. And until we go all the way back and heal that, then we're never going to be able to resolve the problems that we're facing today. And so there was a white Buddhist nun named Sister Claire Carter and an African-American activist artist named Ingrid Askew who initiated this thing called the Interfaith Pilgrimage of the Middle Passage. And I heard about it a week before it started, and I was bored and I wasn't doing anything. So I thought it sounded cool. I've never done anything like it. And I told my mom that I would be gone for a week, that I'd check out the first week. And I essentially didn't come home for a year and a half. I walked all the way to New Orleans with them, and then ended up spending a year overseas in South Asia in their monastery, studying Buddhism and studying their perspective of nonviolence. So yeah, my introduction to nonviolence was a pretty steep, deep dive.
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing. I was also wondering, I know you are the founder and coordinator of the East Point Peace Academy. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what you do?
Yeah, so nonviolence is a word that is a big umbrella, right? People use the word nonviolence and they mean so many different things. And so my introduction to nonviolence was through Buddhist practice. And then when I got home from that year and a half, the year abroad, I got involved in a lot of social change movements and became a nonviolence trainer. And I was preparing people in nonviolent direct action and nonviolent civil disobedience in lots of mass demonstrations and things like that. But about 10 years into that work, I ended up taking a 2-day training in a philosophy called Kingian Nonviolence, Conflict Reconciliation. And it's the philosophies of Dr. Martin Luther King. And even though, at that point, I'd spent 10 years of my life dedicated to social change, and I thought I had some idea of what the word nonviolence meant and who Dr. King was. And in those 2 days, I realized that I had no idea what the word nonviolence meant and no idea who Dr. King was. And so those 2 days just completely transformed my life. And I've been dedicated to the path of like really deeply understanding the rich tradition of nonviolence since then. About 8 months after that training, I became a certified trainer in Kingian Nonviolence. And for a few years, I worked really hard just trying to spread Kingian nonviolence. They're talking to anyone who will listen to me, um, And at some point, I decided that I wanted to start my own organization really dedicated to spreading Kingian nonviolence. So the East Point Peace Academy is a play on words of the military academy at West Point, kind of inspired by the legacy of the leaders of the Nashville Lunch Counter Sit-in movement, who trained in nonviolence for months and months and months before they were allowed to do their first sit-in. And it was by one of the elders from that movement, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who ended up on Dr. Martin Luther King's senior staff, who trained me in Kingian nonviolence and became a mentor of mine. And so East Point was an organization that was initially a training organization dedicated to spreading Kingian nonviolence in the prisons and the county jails and activist communities. But over the last year, we've really been shifting from being just a training organization to being a training and action organization. I remember a couple of, I don't know, 10 years ago, something, I had the opportunity to do some work with the Reverend James Lawson, who was the trainer who trained a lot of the students at the Nashville Lunch Counter Sit-in movement in the civil rights era. And he said this thing to me. He said, don't train for the sake of training, right? Train so that you're preparing people to get into action. And so that conversation with Reverend Lawson always stuck in my head. And so over the last year or so, we've been shifting a lot of our resources into helping to launch this thing called the Yet to Be Named Network, which is a national, nonviolent, decentralized network of direct action teams positioned at the intersection of climate change and racial healing. So that's a lot of the work that we're doing now.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear about all of that and grateful to you for all the work you do. And then my last question is, what does nonviolence mean to you?
You know, after 20 years in this work, you'd think I have a simple answer to that, but really the word just, it means so much. So if I could say a few things, because there's not like an elevator pitch that I've come up with yet, because it's such it's a word that has so much depth. I think part of it is a commitment to healing violence, right? A commitment to building a movement where we recognize that violence itself is the enemy, that this binary us versus them, right versus wrong worldview is at the heart of what is destroying this planet. And so, you know, to me, oftentimes the debates that happen between, well, violence and non-violence, like what's the best way to create social change? And for me, it's like, well, violence is the thing that we're trying to defeat, right? And so, you know, I want to be very clear that I do think that the role of a practitioner of nonviolence isn't to cast judgment on communities who feel like violence is the only way for survival. I do see that judgment happening a lot in nonviolent communities, and I think it's really important that we not go there, right? But one of the things that I say is that, you know, violence can be very effective in keeping you alive and in keeping entire communities alive, and there's great value in that. But one thing that violence can never do is heal relationships, right? When two sides are at odds and when there's a conflict, oftentimes conflict that's been percolating on these lands for 500 years, violence can never bring those two sides together. And I think a real commitment to nonviolence is about acknowledging that, like, yeah, we obviously need to stay alive in order to heal relationships on the other end of it. But to me, a commitment to nonviolence is a commitment to that long-term reconciliation process. There's an incarcerated trainer in Soledad prison here in the Central Valley in California that I work with, who once told me that resolving a conflict is about fixing issues, and reconciling a conflict is about repairing relationships. And to me, we can wage strategic nonviolent campaigns or even violent movements and resolve issues, in the sense that we can pass new pieces of legislation. We can even use violence to instill fear in people until they change their behavior. But until we begin the long and hard process of repairing relationships and moving towards beloved community, which is a community where all people are liberated, then we're always going to be spinning our wheels. And so to me, a commitment to nonviolence is a commitment to healing relationships, moving beyond violence, and moving towards a world where all people, and by all people, I really mean all people, can achieve our full human potential and be liberated.
Yes, that's beautiful. And thank you for sharing and being here today. We at Pache Bene are so grateful for you. Thank you, Kazu.
Thank you so much.